All right, so this is the Elm Street Corridor Working Group meeting for September 27th at 3 o'clock. Today we're here, we have Jason Federico, myself, Lauren Lind, Tim Davis, and Clark Brewer for members. We are waiting, we may have some other members joining us. It looks like we have a member of the public here. I think it's George McGoldrick, yet to be determined. And then we have Jeff and Jim from Weston and Sampson. So thank you all for taking the time this Monday to get together. I'm gonna just turn it over to either Jim or Jeff, whoever wants to get started, and ask you to sort of just walk us through the material that was circulated. I did distribute it today, so members may not have had a chance to go through it. But I think that'll be our starting point, and then we'll go from there.
You're on mute.
Jim, you're on mute.
You're still muted, Jim. Hello, Chief.
Yeah, Jim, are you able to unmute yourself?
I am.
You
All
are.
set.
Hi, Chief.
Good afternoon, everyone. Are you folks able to see what I'm sharing?
Yes, thank you.
Great. Okay, so just kind of quickly going through what we have here, and we can get into a little more detail on the report. I'll show you folks that too as well. But just kicking us off here. So the agenda today include update on the conceptual layouts, the two alternatives with the changes that have been made. So we wanted to go over that. The project report, and then I think we have the public forum scheduled for October 7. I just wanted to double check on that because.
Yeah, so on that note, we have placed a hold on that date, but I think we can discuss at the end whether we want to proceed with the 7th or if we try to do the 14th or the 21st, depending on how much time we need for public notification and if there's any changes or anything that needs to be addressed after today.
Okay, sounds good. All right, real quick here, status. So basically what we've done is update the alternatives. We had a meeting a few days back. Myself, Lauren, Mike Sardina, Jeff, and the chief. Am I skipping anybody, Lauren? I think that was it. To talk about basically the sections of, the typical section for the middle section, and then a couple of changes to the alternatives on either side. I'm gonna turn it over to Jeff in just a minute to talk through those, but we've updated those, and we pulled together the report that Lauren sent out earlier today. So that is set to go, and of course we've also been working with you guys, and Lauren has scheduled, or at least set holds on a couple of meeting dates that we have upcoming. So I think that's the main things that have changed or been added in terms of status. The one other thing is that we are, I believe, still waiting to hear back on the grant, and Lauren put in for a warrant request.
I did, and I'll just add, sorry, I was finding the mute button. Just for the working group to be aware, I'm waiting. We are anticipated to hear back about the One Stop for Growth grant in October. I'll check in if we have a more concrete date, but so we're still waiting to hear the outcome of that grant application. But what I did in the meantime is some contingency planning, as I placed a request for this special town meeting coming up, and I had asked Jim and Jeff to sort of break down, because originally the ask that we had for One Stop was for the full cost of design, like essentially getting the project shovel ready, whereas that's going to be in the ballpark of $500,000. That was what we asked for the grant, but we know that that's a big ask for town meeting. So what I did is I asked them to chunk it out into phases so that what we'd be asking town meeting for would be approximately $250,000 for the design level design. So we will look into phasing if necessary, but I just wanted you all to be aware that we're doing some contingency planning in case One Stop does not come through as an award. So thank you.
And one other minor thing I'll mention is the opinion survey. We're on that second opinion survey. We're up to 154 responses. Shall we close that at this point, Lauren? Or do you want to leave it open for some whatever reason?
I think we could close that now, since the group sort of finalized or narrowed down what their recommendation is. And I'll also just let you guys know Diane Kennedy is joining us now. Hi, Diane. Oh, she's not here yet. Here she is. Anyway, you can resume. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So at this point, I'm going to turn it to Jeff and let him go through the changes to the alternatives that I just mentioned.
Thanks, Jim. So on alternative 2 on the village end, one of the kind of discussion points that came up was the connection to Highland Ave. And there was some concern with parking up in that area and maintaining access up to there. What was kind of batted around in our discussion last week was this here may be the more viable option, but perhaps the town could allow specific resident permit parking for 3 or 4 of those spaces to replace the ones of people pulling up on Highland Ave, so that you don't have kind of the mix of cars cutting up into Highland Ave and then backing out onto Elm Street across the new sidewalk areas and whatnot. So that's why this has not changed, but certainly it could be simply moved back to, something different as we move forward in the preliminary design, if so desired. Go ahead, Jim, to the next page.
Can I just ask a question?
Yep, go back. Yeah.
Sorry, yeah, if you could just go back, because the consensus was that they were not going to do one ways. So this is still showing the one-way configuration.
That's Jim's fault. You probably don't have the other one up, Jim, so you're muted. So basically, if that's the case, then the project pretty much stops right at the Brook Street intersection. We don't continue with additional work down, unless there was some desire, as we move into preliminary design, to try and do anything at the corner where Main Street meets in to kind of tighten that up at all. I apologize. Jim, next plan now. Thank you, Lauren. I think that the last working group meeting was the one I couldn't be at, so I apologize for not catching that. So this is the original plan that was drawn through the midsection that was shown at the public meetings and whatnot, and was talked about. And Jim, if you go to the next one, this is a zoomed in based on a conversation last week. We kind of adjusted some of the cross-sectional elements here to minimize the footprint. So the sidewalk on the south was shown as an 8-foot, and we're calling it a proposed sidewalk rather than a shared use path, just because of the connotation pushes Mass DOT and others into thinking it's a 10-foot minimum. This allows it just to be a wide sidewalk that can be used by bicyclists, say younger bicyclists, pedestrians, etc. We would still look at doing some sharrow markings and possibly signage to get you more seasoned and comfortable bikers to stay on the roadway. I think one of the recommendations was the chief was to provide a 9-foot parking stall here instead of an 8-foot adjacent to the late 11-foot travel lane to give a little bit more room. And then on the north, we bumped up the shoulder from a 1-foot to a 2-foot, so you've got a 13-foot width across. We've actually pulled the sidewalk to the front along the roadway. And right now I'm just showing proposed grass because underneath is some of the old pavement from the old sidewalk, because you're pulling in, not having any parking on the north. And as you can see, we have shown approximate locations of a couple of the telephone poles. There are a couple locations where that pole is a little bit more in the middle of the sidewalk. In those areas, what we recommend is we just bump the sidewalk out a little bit and create a little bit more width on the backside to accommodate ADA considerations. So is there any questions on this? I don't want to get all the way to the end. If it's easier, if somebody had a specific question now.
I don't see anybody.
Okay. Go ahead, Jim, jump to this. So then this was the alternative. I do have the correct one, Lauren, on this one. Just to go back, Jim.
Yes, that's the correct alternative here. Thank you.
So this was the alternative as originally was drawn, and one of the discussion points was the possibility of moving the sidewalk to the front, so we didn't have that separate green strip between the roadway on, we'll call it the west side for, I guess it is the north, the way the north there, I forgot this got shifted. That green strip in between the sidewalk and the roadway was removed on the north side, and then we try to incorporate some parking along that green space in between the intersection and the new proposed development. So Jim, if you want, I can kind of show that on that next slide, please. So this is what we adjusted. So we have basically carved in a little bit to some of the green space and created, 5 more parking spaces here along this stretch. And as you can see on the north side there, we pulled the sidewalk right up close to the roadway, and that was to kind of keep from having to get into some of those, there's some steep walls and grading and whatnot up to a few of those houses as you go along the street. And then we're still keeping 24 feet of pavement. One of the considerations that was talk about, how many more parking spaces could we get? The only concern is we get as we get toward that corner on Margin, the roadway curb to curb kind of starts to narrow up. Certainly as we get into a real preliminary design instead of conceptual, and we're looking at the actual CAD drawings, actual locations of utility poles and stuff, there may be a possibility to add 1 or 2 more parking spaces and shift the road a little bit. But to be conservative for now, we left at this point knowing it's easier to add an extra parking space than to show the public 6 and have to take one out later and everybody questions it. So any specific questions on this one?
Yeah, I got a question. The curb cuts for the driveways, graphically, it looks like the asphalt from the roadway goes to the property line. And I would imagine that there would be a drop off, like 2 feet from the roadway, and that the sidewalk would actually run in. And I wondered if graphically, if we're showing these in public, do we want to show, like a hybrid graphic where the sidewalk continues? Because it kind of looks like you step down, walk on someone's driveway, and then you step up on a curb. But I don't think that's what you mean or intend, or what the end result would be. So I'm wondering if there's a graphic line that lines up with the outside or the street side edge of the sidewalk, and then there's some kind of graphic that's not doesn't look like gray roadway that takes that space where the sidewalk would actually be continuous where it overlaps the driveways.
Right, it all depends on grading, Clark.
I understand.
Because, you may choose, I know what you're saying, you're talking how that kind of Mass DOT has the detail where off the roadway, you do like a 15% slope up to the sidewalk, and then you're pretty much flush across the driveway, and then goes back up into the driveway, so that's
Where's the blend? I guess
flush.
the thing would be where is the blend, and graphically, can you show it so that it looks like the sidewalk has a precedence over the driveway?
Yeah, I mean, we can figure out something to show, or we can show, I think I might have a 3D view of the actual Mass DOT detail of kind of how the sidewalk is built. I mean, we could do it a couple different ways. We could show it as 2 dark lines, one on the top, one on the bottom, that shows the sidewalk extended, and we can actually leave it as tan and just show that that's the sidewalk going across the driveway, and then have gray on the outside and gray on the roadside, just indicating how those would tie in.
Yeah, I mean, even if the area in the driveway is a slightly darker tan, then it still looks like it's a continuous sidewalk.
Yeah,
But it's clear graphically that the driveway doesn't take precedence over the sidewalk in terms of graphic terms, and that what the drop off is at the street edge.
Yeah, that's certainly, we could do something at that. That's not.
What is the the angle of the blend from the line at the street would be 15.
Yeah, I think they do 15% for 2 feet, but it all depends. We may end up, and then what it is, it's 2%, 5%, 15%, excuse me, for the first 2 feet. And then it's a 4 foot of basically no steeper than 2% to meet ADA across. And then we blend into the driveway from there.
And right now we're conceptually thinking about granite curbing, and how high is the granite curbing?
That can vary. Most places either use a 6 or a 7-inch reveal. If you use a 7, that clears most bumpers and doors that open on cars, and it gives you the ability to have several roadway overlays in the future before you start, getting real narrow on your reveal and having to talk about coplane and overlay the road.
Yeah,
But certainly 6 inches reasonable as well. Or in this area, you might choose along Margin Street where it's real steep. Maybe you do 7-inch on this side, and it's maybe 6 on the other side where the driveways and the lots on the south are much flatter for the roadway. So you're not dealing with, having to grade out onto people's properties as much. So there could be a little flexibility in there. Then we can certainly, that can be more of as we step into the next design stage.
yeah. At 15% slope, how much is 7 inches over 6 inches in terms of depth?
I think the detail is 2 feet at 6 inches, so I
Yeah.
have to look at the detail.
Yeah, interestingly enough, a big curb can make a difference, having it right sized. Again, whether it's 5, 6, or 7, those differences can make a difference to people.
Yeah,
You
no,
know,
you're
like
right. And that's why I would suggest the granite and not like a Cape Cod berm, because a Cape Cod berm doesn't really do much adjacent to a sidewalk because it's easy for a car just to drive right up and park there, or go off the road errantly and drive up on there much easier. Snowplows tend to rip it up easier. So granite tends to be the one durable and looks nice too, because it kind of, you see the edges of the road rather than everything's just black, kind of right up to the sidewalk, especially if you're doing asphalt sidewalks. Seems like at night, everything starts to blend right in.
Yeah, well, the higher the curb is, like the bridge going over to the Cape, you got a 12-inch curb, right?
Oh, that's crazy. Yeah.
So, it's not a comfortable place to walk anyway, but when you're driving along it, it doesn't feel like, it feels like you're too close. So again, I think there may be a happy medium somewhere between 5, 6, and 7, but if graphically you could show the sidewalks as sort of having the graphic precedent over the actual driveways, I think that would help in the sell to the public as the
Sure.
concept works.
Yeah, I'm just writing this down before I forget. Apologize. Now, would you
And as long as
want,
As long as I've been doing all this talking, the Highland Ave Extension, that you look like you showed it so that it's only a pedestrian walkway. You were going to change that so that people are going to be able to drive up in there, right?
Actually, that was discussed last week, and it was decided to continue to show it this way with the assumption that those parking spaces up there would potentially be issued as resident parking in those 3 or 4 additional spaces that we created along the roadway, so that you don't have cars pulling up and then having to back all the way out Highland onto Elm Street.
Well, I'm not. That's probably going to have a fair amount of opposition, even if what's going up there doesn't make sense. I mean, I think it makes sense to open up the top of the hill to pedestrians and bicycles. But if you're cutting off the parking up there, all those people that park there now aren't going to like it. So
what if you did it the reverse way? What if you did, since the other end of Highland is the lower volume roadway, what if you did the parking up at the top instead of having them come in from the bottom?
well, you have these different constituencies, right? Like all the people on the top of Highland Ave, they have enough traffic that they have to deal with on Sunday for all those church people. And
Yeah, and I'm just tossing that out there, Clark. By no means am I saying the solution.
So in terms of if you're cutting off the traffic and you're making it a pedestrian bicycle access point, just make it super clear that that's really what you're doing so that we can hear everybody complain right away.
Yep. And is there any, from the group's perspective, is there any feeling on if you were to say, take the 4 or 5 new spaces that were created above what's already out there and said those were resident only parking and they were issued to those specific people up there. So they're not just any resident, it's specific to those 4 or 5, and that offsets the traffic, their existing parking up on the hill. Does that
You know,
sound palatable?
that might work like after 6 PM or after 8 PM or something like that for a resident only, but there's plenty of businesses in that area that would use those parking spots during the day, during business hours. So I don't know, maybe that's a detail. I'm not sure that's a concession that helps everybody, but that's the balancing act, right? You do something and then people freak out and then you make an adjustment.
Well, the funny part, Clark, is I look at it as the business owners own the buildings that have the apartments up above, so that they've got competing reasons for having parking.
Sure. Yeah.
So they'll probably be the ones that'll be the most vocal, will be, do I want the rental space for my renters to have parking for upstairs, or do I want the parking for my businesses down below?
Yeah. I understand it. Every design change has,
Pros and
5 different
cons.
impacts.
Yep.
Anytime you change one thing, it has a trickle effect on 5. So I would say, as long as it's clear graphically what you're proposing, then people can react to it in whatever way they think makes sense.
Okay.
But having options in your back pocket, like access from the top, or some kind of
Continued access the way it is with just some minor revisions to the plan we show, not the,
I don't have a crystal ball, but I would think that if those people who are using it now see what's proposed, that there may be some freak out. So just be ready for it. That's all. Change is hard. Change can be hard for people.
So I do have one question, Clark, on that comment about making the sidewalks continuous. Do you want that on the entire plan or just these kind of blow-ups that show more detail?
Well, I mean, I think graphically, if you're showing this as an enlarged thing, that's the thing to focus on. But
Okay.
graphically, and what the configuration is at the driveway, if the blend, if you will, starts at the street edge, at the granite curb edge, and it slopes up the 6 inches for 2 feet, that's a kind of impact on the continuity of the sidewalk and the walking experience. With effectively narrowing the sidewalk to 6 feet at the south side from the 8 feet. So I think there's an impact there that might require adjustments in thinking about it. That's why I'd appreciate it if you could graphically show it.
Right. I guess my question is, though, do you want us to go back and update the entire corridor that way, or just the blow-ups that we'll be discussing in a little more detail?
Well, I don't know. I'd say whatever you think makes sense.
Okay.
I wouldn't want to give you a requirement, an extra busy work.
I get you.
To figure out every single driveway, but the blow-ups for sure.
Yeah, I think in the blow-up, it makes more sense and we can describe it a little bit better to people. And I think being a larger format, it'll be easier to show and explain. And I'll look for that detail that I know we've used from Mass DOT before. It's almost like a 3D perspective view that kind of, you see how it works. See if I can
Sounds
find
great.
that and bring it in.
That sounds great.
Jim, I'm just trying to think, do we have anything else here, or does anybody else have any questions? Actually, can you go back just for 1 sec, Jim? There is, I don't know if you can see it, Jim, I don't know if you can point to it, but there is a little circle in the middle of the intersection. Nope, to the left.
Over here, sorry.
That is a utility pole, but it appears to be like a continuation of a service pole and does not appear to have like main line, trunk line runs to it. So I don't see that as a major impediment to relocation of the intersection. Just so you're aware, that is not a trunk line piece with like 3-phase wires and everything else. It services the 2 houses on the opposite the intersection on the south side.
Down here.
Yep.
Sounds good.
Where
I
is
just
the
thought I'd mention
fisherman-
that in case anybody saw that and had a question.
Where is the fisherman's well?
That's that circle right in the middle above proposed landscape area. Nope, Jim, the
Right
one
to the
left.
left.
Oh, this one,
Yeah, the
sorry.
other one.
Ah,
Oops.
I
Yeah,
clicked by accident.
okay.
Yeah, so we don't, theoretically, we don't impact it by any of the work we're doing.
No, I think it would actually improve it. It would make it. I
I'm
think
glad
that's
you brought that up,
perfect.
Tim. Is there a way that we could we just add Fisherman's Well onto the, so
Sure.
that people, because I don't want, I mean, I'm going to actually meet with a liaison from the Historical Commission to review this, but I think for the most part, people will be more comfortable if they can be sure that it's not going away in
I
this new
agree.
concept.
I
I see,
agree. I
we have a
think the
hand raised.
Historical Commission would like to work on it and actually improve it.
Yes.
So, yeah, I think that's a good idea, Lauren. Put
Yep, just
something
to
out
have
there.
the words there, that way they know that we're planning to include this. George, did you have a question?
I just wanted to comment on this plan that we're looking at now, that I think the stop signs are very critical to help slow down the bend on Elm Street. I think that's a major improvement for that area, and I know the residents there have been very, very concerned about how the cars come flying down there. Just
Great.
also the question earlier about the one-way back up the street.
Yeah, we're
What was it?
unfortunately, George, you might have caught on a little late. We're actually, that's the wrong concept.
No, I know,
It's
but yeah, I'm just
Oh.
curious why it was thrown out, because I think for a lot of reasons, it's a very good concept. So why was it discarded?
So in discussions about this concept, we realized that it has implications about the striping for the parking spaces on the other way. And while we were trying to add more spaces, that was the ultimate goal with this one. As we continued to look at it, it was sort of causing more problems that we'd have to solve then. So it was determined to just maintain the configuration as it is.
And she's referring to the parking parking aisle on South Main Street, how the parking is all the opposite angle. So if you actually came down Elm and made a left, you're very restricted in how many parking spaces you have access to on South Main Street, heading further south. Correct,
That
Lauren?
That doesn't change. Coming out of Elm and going left into downtown, that doesn't change from whether it's one way or two. I'm not
But
following.
today, but Brook Street does flip, and Brook Street is one way in toward Elm. So today you can actually come down Brook Street, take a right, and turn into any one of those angled parking spots along South Main. But you wouldn't have access to those easily unless you made a U on South Main Street to access it with this configuration as easily.
Okay, I understand now. Just trying to drive more traffic to the red line and.
Well,
Well, thank you, George.
there's,
Yeah, thank you for asking. It's good to get that clarified.
George, I think there are a lot of people that like to have that one-way configuration, but we really do need to work on parking before we do. And the consensus was leave it as is for now, but yeah, we'll address that hopefully when we addressing the greater village issues.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think the only issue with the intersection of Elm and South Main is that the pedestrian sidewalk is removed from the corner, and that's very confusing for pedestrians and motorists. The existing condition now.
Right, because you have no crossing across the end of Elm on that side of South Main Street.
Correct.
Yep, I hear you.
All right, thank you.
I think the chief has got his hand up.
Can we back up to that middle section real quick? I just didn't know if I saw something or didn't see something. I know there's been a lot of conversation in the last 2 weeks about a crosswalk at Elm Court and Elm Street. Is that in here someplace on one of these slides?
I did not show it on this one.
I think we decided we were gonna put it in, but that it
That's,
isn't.
yeah, it's in the right-hand side of that plan. You can see it.
Okay,
It's just not in the blow up because we were trying to kind of condense to a section that was easy to show. So it'd be over to your right-hand side, but it was still being shown.
I didn't see it at first. That's why I asked the question. It's one of those things that seems to be getting a lot of traffic at the present time.
Yep. No, it's definitely still shown. There's that one there, and then obviously the ones at Margin and the realigned intersection, as well as there is one at Stevens. So that can accommodate the people coming from the, was it an elderly housing community, I believe, out behind the fire station, fire station.
Thank you. I think Jason has his hand raised.
In that midsection, I thought we were leaving the grass strip out on the edge to incorporate those utility poles so that they're not in the sidewalk.
So that was one of the discussion points that I think we had mixed reviews on, but the concern I remember was that the small grass strip along, it would just not be really, it'd be difficult to maintain. So that's why we had recommended in the detail section when we met with Mike Sardina not to have the grass strip. But and if we want to change that, that's for discussion.
There are some spots, Jason, where those poles move a little further north. So in the end, even if you have a grass strip on the front, I think you're going to run into a point where some poles may end up in sidewalk. With this option, we could actually do a short section of widened sidewalk and kind of widen it into that proposed grass area to help get around those poles a little easier.
Okay, that works.
That way, if you're thinking,
How much does it cost to move the poles? A lot?
it's not so much a cost, sometimes it's a timing. A lot of times, if you're asking as part of a project to move the poles, there's some reasonable amount if you're moving them in and out with the utility companies. Sometimes it just literally can take you 2 to 3 years to get them to do it. Because if they're doing it partially on their dime, they're in no rush.
Right,
But
right.
if you try to,
If you were to move them, you'd move them to this, what's green on the graphically, and get them away from the street so people don't drive into them and stuff like that. Right.
that would be the ultimate. If you were completely, redesigning the corridor, yes, you try and move them to the backside where they would be out of the way, assuming that they're not impacting any trees on private property that now become an issue that you have to work with the abutters to cut or trim and whatnot.
I mean, does it, if we're upgrading this corridor, does it make sense to, I mean, is there a tangible benefit to pulling those out of the sidewalk and into the grassy strip to the north?
Well, here's another thought. If timing and money are more of a concern, you could build, say, this, and if you're doing asphalt sidewalks, you could work with the utilities to coordinate the moving of the poles as part of the future project, and then you just have to patch the holes where they pulled the old poles out. So you could look at that option.
If it works in the future, yeah, great.
Exactly. We could make sure that we try to design it such that it doesn't preclude that option for the community in the future, but maybe it doesn't need to be addressed right now, so you can at least get some benefit started and you're not kicking your project out to, especially if you get a grant, because then the timing becomes so much more critical.
That sounds practical.
Now, just out of curiosity, and this one I'll kind of push maybe more toward Jason as the initial question. Was there some final decision? Are these going to be asphalt sidewalks, or are you thinking concrete?
That's a group decision. If I was DPW, I'm going to say asphalt, they're easier to maintain, but I think the group's probably going to say concrete.
There's going to be pros and cons of each. Concrete's going to be a little bit more expensive, right?
Right, and patching those holes later is a little bit more obvious and has the potential, to sink more and whatnot. I just figured it might come up in the next public forum, especially considering the concept show the tan color. So some people might immediately think concrete. I don't necessarily need a decision today. The community, you can certainly talk amongst yourselves and kind of come to a decision. Just be prepared for the question is all.
Very, very quickly, I don't think there's any concrete sidewalks anywhere downtown right now. Everything is asphalt as far as I can remember, all the way to the harbor. The only thing that's got any detail to it is in front of the War Memorial. I don't think anything else does.
Yeah, you've got brick in the village, brick and asphalt in the village.
Brick
And I think-
crosswalks, asphalt sidewalks, right?
Well, there's a little bit of brick sidewalk right at the South Main Street intersection, kind of that big bow out that occurs there.
Yeah, the
That's more
bump
like a
outs.
Plaza.
Yep, the two bump outs.
Yep. And then down in the harbor, there, everything appears to be asphalt, with the exception, you're right, by the War Memorial, there's the little bit where the crosswalk comes across. Yep.
So I'm thinking one way or the other. It just seems like we might start chasing our tail if we do something different than what we've done in the past.
A couple things to consider, you know, your ramps at driveways would most likely still be done out of concrete because they'd be more durable and long lasting, especially with the weird kind of angle we were talking. And of course, all your pedestrian crosswalk locations, it's recommended you do concrete so that a visually impaired person knows they're stepping on a different material even before they get to the tactile warning pads at the actual street level. So there will still be some concrete. Any other questions? Oops, sorry.
Yeah, this is Mike. I'm calling in. I think that the detail of what the material is not something we should discuss at the public forum, because it's going to be potentially something that's going to be driven by budget. But if I was to make a recommendation in terms of hierarchy, the wide sidewalk on the south side should be a different material than the one on the north side. And I agree with Chief Sylvia that I don't think there's a concrete sidewalk anywhere in town, except the materials that are changes at South Main Street in the village center, where we have brick and granite. So I would leave that unsaid at this time. I think that your graphic in terms of differentiating road color from sidewalk color is fine. It doesn't necessarily say anything more than we're maintaining sidewalks on both sides of the street, and they're crossing through, as Clark was referring to earlier. The readability of the plan should be a continuous sidewalk that cuts through this, graphically cuts through all of the driveways. So it looks like it's a continuous material, but it may not be in the end.
So we could add a note to the drawings and to the report that says material to be decided or something like that, just so as not to create. These are concept plans, so I don't think we have to get into that kind of detail. I think granite curbs is fine, as opposed to some other options. The granite curbs are, you know, what's existing now, so that's fine to say that's what that material is going to be. And I think, as Jason was talking about, you know, at intersections and places where there's going to need to be a handicap curb cut, those materials will obviously change to, you know, the tactile tiles and maybe the concrete surrounds. But I think everything else is still up in the air. Those are kind of standard finishes and responses to practicality. I think that's a really good point, Mike.
Thank you. Anybody else have any questions for? I'll give it back over to Jim and let him kind of go. I think we're at the next section, Jim.
Yep. Okay, next item to discuss is the public forum. And what we've done here is outline what we thought would make sense to cover in the public forum. So one question that we have is how much detail should be included in the initial part of the presentation, whether, we should be doing like a, sort of a 10-minute thing up front, just kind of going through, as reasonably quickly as possible to give people the opportunity to comment. Want to go through more detail than that. Another question is whether to include the undergrounding of utilities, that decision making about whether that was practical or not. It's in the report. Wasn't sure whether you want to air it out in the public forum or not. But other than that, main sort of topics would be project background, what the study area is, engagement, what we've heard so far from folks through the public survey and through the public meetings, observations from existing conditions, go through the conceptual layouts, and then budget and next steps.
Just a quick comment on underground utilities. I think that you would get some aesthetic and functional benefit from having underground utilities at the end where the harbor project is. Elsewhere, I don't think so. If there's a hybrid approach, as opposed to like, okay, it's $10 million to underground all the utilities in this whole corridor area. If we thought about spending the money at the harbor area, that might get the most benefit for the project overall. And we're not spending money in the middle where maybe it doesn't matter so much. So I mean, I hate to split hairs, but I think the harbor area would get the most benefit from putting those underground. And even I'd even say, in the village, whenever that was 20 years ago, when a couple of developers said that they would pay to put the stuff underground, and it didn't pass a town meeting, even though it was probably a quarter of the cost that it might be now. It just didn't happen. There wasn't the will to do that. So I wouldn't recommend that we underground the utilities for the whole area. But I don't know what everyone else thinks, but I think that if it's possible to put those utilities underground in the harbor area, I'm all for that. I think that's where spending the money would make sense as a community and as a stakeholder. What does everybody think of that?
Clark, I totally agree with you. I think that's a great idea. Would you go underground as you approach the end of Elm Street and then continue underground on either side, whether you go down Border Street or down Margin Street?
Well, I don't know. I mean, definitely on the Border Street side would be the most benefit. The Margin Street side, at that point, there is some flooding issues as you drop down into the kind of the lower part of Margin Street. So it might stop at that point.
Yeah. No, I think that's very creative concept.
One suggestion on that, Clark, is given that you have two green space areas, one next to Border and Summer Street and one near the new realigned intersection, those are good kind of spots where, remember we talked about those transformers that need to come off the poles and go to the ground. Those give you some green spaces to tie in those areas. So certainly that could happen, that it's just through that small core area, and that your transformers that are needed on each end to fill in the gaps in between. Might be a possibility.
Yeah, as long as we don't have like, transformers in the view corridor, stuff like that.
I think we could.
But I think that there's a landscape design that would happen in the biggest green space that's being created. So if there's transformers there, I know that the harbor, the Cove project has a transformer on site there. But provided that they're creative locations for those kinds of things. And if there's a preference for transformer and equipment, it would be on the non-harbor side, if you will, I think, maybe in some of those islands.
Yeah,
I think
those
Diane had a
options-
question or comment.
I just wanted to comment in general, and maybe Lauren, and I wasn't at the last meeting, but just in terms of the audience for this public forum, I mean, technically, we're probably going to see a lot of the same faces that we have seen. So I think depending on who we think is going to attend that, we should think about whether we want to open up what I think could be a can of worms about discussing utility undergrounding, because I think everybody in general, if you said, oh, should we bury the wires? Everybody's going to say yes. But, you know, but the devil's in the details. And I don't know that this is necessarily the right, you know, the public forum is actually the right place to have that discussion, because I really see that going on for like 45 minutes. Well, what's it going to cost? Well, what are the options? Well, what if we only did it at, you know, in the Cove area and not the other end of Elm Street? So I just think, just in terms of choreography, it's something we should think A, about the audience, and B, whether this is the right thing to discuss right now. I think it's more important to do this general conceptual layouts and see how far we've gotten since the last public forum.
Yeah, that's exactly why we had this question, because I know it's kind of it can be a little bit of a third rail issue. Undergrounding utilities is quite expensive, and there are some issues of practicality, but there's detail that goes along with that could derail the conversation from everything else that's been done, and could frankly lose momentum by even bringing it up.
This is Mike. I agree with that. I think that you could easily get derailed on this. And in one respect, leaving it as above ground stuff at this point is the worst case scenario. And down the line, if it seems to be something that can be further explored and the stuff goes underground, that's just a giant plus for everybody. The one thing that I would say that's part of that evaluation down the line is that undergrounding is down towards the end of Elm Street there, you know, where basically Border Street, Elm Street interface, that the power poles that are in the sidewalk, I'm going to use that word in quotes, that's along Border Street along the harbor edge. I mean, there's like 3 feet between the seawall and on the water side of those power poles. And the ideal here that Clark was alluding to is that at some point, if we can get underground, you would want to underground all the way along Border Street. And moving those telephone poles or getting rid of the telephone poles would be a huge plus relative to the intent of the Captain's Walk and whatever else can happen along Border Street with respect to parking and curb lines and all this stuff. So getting it all underground then would be, you know, let's say coordinating with the Elm Street project in terms of conceptual reality, that would make a lot more sense to put it off until we know more about how the Captain's Walk and the harbor edges all evolve over the next, 6 months or a year.
So I know the chief has
I
a
think it's a great.
question.
Yeah, quick question in regards to you talking about cost of undergrounding. As was mentioned by Clark, once you go over the hill on Margin Street and down towards Stockbridge Street, that's a constant flooding issue there. But also what we discovered in the last 5 years is when we've had big winter storms, the area of Margin Street in front of 110 and 100 Margin Street, or Elm Street, excuse me, 110, 100 Elm Street, which is in essence that section right next to the new green or the green where the Fisherman's Well is, that has gone underwater multiple times, as well as, as was mentioned, Border Street. Again, we're dealing with sea level rise, and what we saw, I guess it was 2017 or 18 when we had all the snow and all the storms, that road was constantly underwater for almost the month of February. So it's just question on costing of putting things underground in an area that is flood prone was just my question.
Yeah, and you have to elevate the transformers and all that stuff too. So, I mean, that's exactly, that's part of the technical issues with undergrounding down there. Can any of that stuff actually be undergrounded when it's flood prone? So I think that's what the evaluation would need to be, and that's why we shouldn't even bring it up at the next forum. Just leave everything above ground as it is.
I think these are some great points, and I think that for the purpose of the public forum upcoming, it can be noted that we are looking into this and that we'll look into it more for the design phase. But I agree with what's been said. I don't think we need to get completely in the rabbit hole on this because there's so many variables, and I think we plan for worst case scenario that we're not going to underground, and then if we wind up, as Mike said, if we wind up making it work, then that's a win for everyone.
So in the public forum, should we just skip the question altogether? I mean, just skip that discussion item altogether, and if somebody brings it up, we can discuss it, but otherwise just remain silent.
I think that makes sense. If it gets asked, then we can speak to it, but otherwise it wouldn't really make sense to bring it up to sort of distract from the layout concept discussion.
Jason,
I mean, isn't the analysis somewhat simple as far as resiliency is concerned? If all these streets are flooding on a semi-regular basis, especially down by the harbor, how many power lines have gone down in storms on the elevated poles versus the chance of them going down in a flooding event?
Yeah, I don't know, Jason, exactly what it is, or, we'd have to, I don't know if you've had modeling done around this area to know what your sea level rise looks like and how far it stretches up all these roadways. It's not just probably as simple as, gee, 8 feet up is good, because there might be other considerations.
We do have,
Have you seen the generator across the street in the parking lot? That's the flood level. It's 4 feet off the ground.
we have through one of the MVP grants in past years, we did a storm tide pathway mapping study, so we could use some of that data for this.
Yeah, my guess is if you put it up on that hill with a little side road cuts along border, you could get plenty of elevation. And then if the grass, a certain area, one of those grassed in islands had to be raised up to help kind of naturally build it up around it and then put your transformer on it. There are options. I don't think you need, like Jason said and others have said, you don't necessarily need to design it now, but just knowing you could accommodate it and that any design you move forward doesn't preclude it is probably the most important part.
so another question that we had here was about how much detail do we want to include in the presentation? And I think, the calculus is kind of around about how much time do we want to spend up front discussing the project and the background and all that sort of thing. Are we talking about 10-minute presentation, 20 minutes, someplace in the middle?
Does anyone feel strongly? I think I would trend towards, if we have the forum for an hour and a half, in the past they've been an hour and a half, I think 20 minutes is a sufficient amount of time to cover in the detail and then open up for questions. Because I think that it is important to make sure that we're elaborating about why the recommendation is the way that it is based on what the input that we heard. And I want to really highlight that for people, because I think the more you paint the picture beforehand, it'll answer questions on the back end, hopefully.
Yeah, I don't have a strong feeling about how much detail. The issue of the utilities is that we don't want to get bogged down. I honestly think that the public is going to have a hard time wrapping their head around the street reconfiguration, let alone the details of how much sidewalk we're getting and and how the parking works, and maybe if you live right there, how you are impacted directly or benefited. I think those are probably going to be the main focus of this forum. I mean, the detail that supports people understanding what you're proposing, that's important. Uh, for a concept, but like bike racks and trash cans probably aren't going to be that the focus at this point. It's really big picture, the concept, and getting comments on that and how this would work and look and feel.
I think the one thing that might come up relative to the public forum that isn't really represented in the plan relative to feedback that you got in your survey is the idea of street trees and landscape. And I think that if that comes up as a comment and or questions, I suppose we could just say at this point that once we get into the detail, plan detail with the survey information, et cetera, we don't necessarily have to say that there's an existing survey at this point, because you're working in a different format at this point, that it's possible that in a more detailed look at all this, there might be room for some street trees here and there where we're not really displacing parking or whatever. So that might be one item that could be raised relative to the public response to the survey, that they don't see any landscape improvements, landscape in quotes, because I just see landscape in this case as being street trees. But you might just want to noodle on that. Might want to noodle on that a little bit, Jim and Jeff, in case that question does come up. Be able to find a way to finesse it at this level.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, because we definitely do ask that in the survey, because we wanted to know for later stages of design, exactly what folks were interested in. So we can, to some extent, we can say that, that the landscaping and the trees, et cetera, the other amenities are things that are going to get added in. They haven't been forgotten yet. They're just, they're sort of independent details, whereas the things that we're doing right now have dependency on one another and are kind of the major items. Do you think that would make sense as
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think what Clark was saying is that, the big picture here, the big idea here is narrowing the road and widening the walks and aligning with the harbor views and all that kind of stuff. Those are the big picture things. And, as you're saying, that the landscape systems can come along as we further develop this. I don't think anybody's going to say, yeah, we love the plan because it's got street trees. But I also don't think they're going to say they hate the plan because there's no street trees. So that's just my opinion. I mean,
yeah, but you're right. People may bring it up and say like, hey, where are the street trees? And if we don't address it up front, they might bring it up in like a slightly, I don't know, like annoyed way.
Well, the other thing to consider too is this plan better protects a lot of those existing trees and whatnot on the south, because you're pulling away from them a little bit more, and you're pulling in on the north side, so you're having less impact to the established shrubbery, hedgerows and things like that people already got planted. So this, in effect, is kind of preserving some of the natural landscape that's out there, and that will further look at opportunities to increase the landscaping where it's viable.
Yeah.
So this is probably a thing we want to add to the report a little bit too, just a little discussion of amenities and landscaping and things like that. But that's, we haven't forgotten that. That's coming. We know that's important.
Yes.
Okay. I can't see everybody's hands and everything. Any other questions at this point?
Doesn't appear to be.
Okay. All right. So next slide relates to budget and next steps. This is the order of magnitude budget that we put together at this point for the plan that's reflected in the report, and it is it's also reflected in the warrant request that Lauren had put together. So just kind of quickly, next stages of design include budget level design and permitting design, budget level being around 30%. Figure that to be in the 220 to 230 range, roughly the same thing for the permitting design. It's about the same level of advancement. And then the permitting itself, we think that's probably in the $30,000 to $40,000 range. Public engagement, continuing meetings like this, of course, and more public forums, maybe doing some stuff in person, et cetera, about another $50,000 to $60,000. And then final design, our understanding is that you want to do this, roughly speaking, like a design build sort of thing with your on-call contractor in the town. And so final design would be done in tandem with construction. So that would be built into the construction phase. Questions, comments about this at this point?
How much of the budget is already approved? How much of this budget is already contracted for?
None of it.
Lauren, I'll let you answer that, but I don't believe any of it is.
None of it. No. We
Okay,
have
so
a
just schematic design and public outreach is the scope. And then this is the scope to get the job done.
yes.
That's
This is the next steps.
Right. And these were budget level, Clark, because we hadn't actually sat down because we didn't have a design kind of more vetted out. So when we really sit down and give you an actual scope and fee, there may be, some more on the lower end probably than the higher end, unless you change your mind and want underground utilities and things like that. So these are budget level. And then when we work with the town to create an actual scope of work to further define it, we can dial it in a little bit more. And I'll tell you, we've certainly done this type of process. I've worked on several projects where we've had a community that has an on-call contractor. And what's great and can actually be some savings as we go through is if they're reviewing the plans at certain stages and making sure things are constructible, making sure they don't see anything that costs them more money to do it the way that's shown, rather than, gee, if we tweak it a little bit, it makes it a lot cheaper for the community and easier. So those are some things that we can certainly work through to try and have cost savings all the way through.
All right, and that's why everything's presented as a range at this point, because there is, we do expect there'll be some up and down.
Sounds good.
I don't see any other questions.
Okay, thanks, Lauren. All right, so general discussion now, but I think before we do that, we probably want to go through the report a little bit. So I'll pull that up and we can just
Jim,
kind of.
before you do that, can I share my screen real quick?
Of course.
The reason I'm asking is I want to let me know if you can see that screen.
Not yet.
Okay, might take a sec. And yeah.
Oh, yes.
Oh, it's coming up now.
No, did it disappear? Which screen are you? I think
We
you're
can
seeing
see
the
a
ones.
driveway curb.
Yeah, so that's kind of that detail, Clark, that I was talking about, where it kind of goes up at the front. There is a little bit of drop down on both sides to help the driveway.
Yes.
That's one option if you went with straight kind of curb in with 2-foot kind of curb corners on it. The
Right.
other you can do is just a straight in section like that, so there is no curve. Those are the kind of the two options that we can utilize that every contractor in Mass knows how to build, so it's not like we're reinventing the wheel. So I just thought I'd share that, and I can try and kind of maybe put something in the plan somewhere that kind of shows the public that, to show that the sidewalk is the dominant piece through the middle, and then the driveway comes
I think
across.
that's it. That's an important thing to convey as a part of the graphics for the project.
Awesome. Well, thank you for bringing it up. I appreciate that.
And there's both. There's like where the streets are, and then the driveways might have a slightly different attention.
The streets would be, the sidewalk would actually go down and become a crosswalk. So you wouldn't have this kind of transition at a street level, only at your driveways. All right. Now I can't seem to stop sharing. Oh, there we go. Found it. Ooh, sorry about that. Thank you. I just figured I'd show that while we were still talking plans. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Jim, you're on mute.
Does the report cover up where folks can see it?
Yes.
All right, great. All right, so report cover. Go down through this a little bit, just real quick. I think this outlines what's in the report pretty well. So there's a general section on background in the study area, engagement, the engagement process that we've used, data gathering, methods of review, evaluation of existing conditions, the undergrounding of utilities that we were discussing a couple of minutes ago, and then conceptual layouts and recommended budget and next steps. Obviously, this follows pretty much how we're suggesting doing the public forum too. Ideas to make these things match up so it's easy for people to follow along. And we just will skip over the undergrounding of utilities. And then I should point out, currently in the appendices, we also have working group meeting materials, the public meeting materials, the online survey data that's been collected, and the design alternatives. One thing I was thinking about is that this report gets fairly long with the appendices and some of the PowerPoints that are included in the working group materials and the public meeting materials. And frankly, it can be a little redundant too. I was thinking about we can discuss this as we go along, the wisdom about, or the wisdom of taking out the PowerPoint, shortening up the report a little bit, making it easier for people to download and hopefully look through. So we all know where the study area is. This is how it's presented in the report. Just a brief discussion of the purpose of doing this, which is improve the view corridor, make improve parking, pedestrian and bicyclist safety, and slow the traffic down. Discussion of engagement. So it begins with discussion of the corridor working group, which of course includes all of you. The public meetings that we've held, and there's of course been 2 so far, there'll be a third. We can include the third one in here as well, but we haven't had it yet, so of course it's not in here at this point. Public opinion surveys, so 2 of those that I think identified some pretty interesting elements that we brought into the design. Let's see, some key things about that in the first one. And both of these have very good response rates. I thought the first one being 128 responses. I think it's 153 that is written up in the second one currently, but I think we're up to 154. So I'll just adjust that as needed. Let's see, the, things to address that came from the first survey, which had these in rank order, were the wider streets, adding street trees, landscaping beautification, enhanced pedestrian crossings, adding bicycle lanes, traffic calming, improved street lighting, and wayfinding. And then in the second survey, we got some somewhat different information, I guess. And in this one, it came out that improved pedestrian safety, visual connection to Cohasset Harbor, improved roadway condition and increased roadway capacity for bicycles, and increased traffic enforcement were key elements. So I think both designs, add to each of these things in various ways. But we queried folks as to which alternative they felt added, did the best job of adding these things, by asking them whether certain items, whether they agreed or agreed strongly, just kind of adding those together. We have the percentages in here. Public outreach materials. So those included various public meetings, social media posts, invitations, etc. And please feel free, if you want, to stop me as I'm going through this and ask questions or raise comments. But next section is data gathering and method of review. So data was gathered from a variety of existing materials. We pulled together base mapping from the survey data that the town had already had done, and existing GIS information, as well as aerials for the background. Then we conducted a field review, and that was done on March 20th. Then we get into evaluation of existing conditions, and we looked at existing conditions from a few different perspectives. Pedestrian access and safety, same thing for cyclists, automobiles and trucks, just basically a qualitative assessment as to how safe it is to travel through the area, or what safety concerns automobiles and trucks might add to. The ability for emergency vehicles to get through the area, and available parking. And then as far as each one of those items go, we get into a little more detail about our findings. We collected some photographic information where appropriate. We included photos. We certainly have quite a number more photos, if we wanted to look at additional ones, but these were just some representative ones to include. This part shows an existing section. We kind of, overlaid that, if you will, with a photograph of the midsection, so that you can, looking down the street, so you can see how the approximate existing section fits within that picture, so that you can see, essentially that the right-of-way extends a good deal, good number of feet into what people probably think of as their front yards that are already landscaped, which is a key element of this project, is trying to remain within the existing used travel corridor, and not extend up onto what people might think of as their lawns. This is the undergrounding of utilities section. We talk a little bit about, some of the challenges associated with it, the number of utilities that are carried on typical poles, and of course the transformer cans that need to be addressed in one way or another. We noted a cost range for undergrounding of utilities, so someplace in the neighborhood of 2.2 to 2.8 million. And then some of the practical issues. So landowner consultations, how that might interrupt schedule and how it might raise complications. Additionally, the individuals beyond the 2.2 to 2.8 million will need to fund their own connections. And then the relocation of transformer cans. So you take those transformer cans from up on poles, and of course you put them down on the ground. And this is an example of what that might look like. We also noted that, you know, these things are of varying size. So where you have more wires, more utilities, you probably need a larger transformer box. And they're not exactly visually pleasing. Plus, some of the issues that were brought up earlier, I think Jason was mentioning about the flooding of certain parts of the area, and you know, how transformers at grade may not be practicable given that condition. Conceptual layouts. We've talked about these things before. What each one of these alternatives brings forward to considerations for the varying areas. And then the selection of an ultimate approach. We've kind of been through this already, so I won't belabor it too much here, but we took the clips that we were just looking at in the PowerPoint, we brought them into the report, and explained you know, the changes that we decided to make to the concept alternatives 1 and 2 to make it work a little bit better. And then budget and recommended next steps, we've already been over this too. So, you know, order of magnitude cost with the same ranges that I was just showing before. And that's basically it, except for appendices. So any questions and comments?
Anyone?
Yeah, you know, I was just thinking about the project. Big picture might be that on the north side of Elm Street, you leave the curb and the sidewalk as is, and the work runs from you know, the village work, the south side of the corridor, and then whatever's required for reconfiguring the street. I mean, there's a whole stretch of the north side of Elm Street that it's got curb, it's got sidewalk, pulling up the curb and moving it a foot. You know, it might not. Well, I don't want to throw water in onto the electrical circuits, but
Couple things to consider on that, Clark, are just the curb reveal is kind of non-existent on that side. So you've either got to take the pavement down or raise the sidewalk up. So you'd be adjusting potentially that curb anyways. And then the existing sidewalk width and the path around the utility poles in a lot of cases may not meet current ADA standards.
I know,
So
but if we don't touch it, and we have budget issues, then the scale back version would be the village, the harbor, and then the south side. I just, you know, the north side, it's not that bad, and over focusing on that compared to the south side, where that's where you're making the connection. I think that that's something to dwell on, or maybe kick around as.
Right. Yeah, we'll have to kick that around a little further because there are certain considerations that once you touch a road, ADA currently, because it is a federal law, does require certain things to be done. So whether they're done unilaterally along the entire north side or at spot locations where conformance is an issue, can certainly be looked at from a cost perspective.
Yeah.
Any other comments from the working group or any of our attendees? All right, seeing none, I think I would like to talk about schedule next. That's all right. So in preparing for the forum, again, we had originally flagged the first week in October, and then ideally the 7th, that was the remaining date that I had people hold. in my opinion, I think we could benefit for another week by having time to review the material beforehand. So I would like to suggest, pending people's availability, that instead of doing October 7th, we either do the 14th or even the 21st, depending on people's availability. Like I said, I just want to really make sure that we've gone through everything, looked over any sort of, bumps that might be, any errors in the slide. I just want to make sure that everything is ready to go. And also, I think that it's going to benefit the community to have more time to be prepared, as opposed to saying, by the way, the forum's next week. If I can give people 2 weeks out, I think that's preferable. I know everybody's really busy this time of year, so I just want to make sure that we have enough time for people to mark their calendars.
Yeah, I'm
Thank
okay
you.
with pushing the schedule to the 21st or if that makes sense, to give you the opportunity to do as much outreach as possible. We're not talking about an in-person forum. This would be a Zoom meeting kind of thing, right?
Yes, I'm glad you brought that up. I had been hoping that our third forum could be in person, but the way that everything has been going, at this point, I also thought we'd be returning for board and committee meetings, but we're still on Zoom, so we are going to have to do this virtually. So, I'm disappointed. I think that, of course, there's some pros and cons to the virtual platform, but unfortunately at this time, I just can't recommend that we gather in person when our board and committee meetings aren't even gathered in person at this
For
time.
this thing, it would be so great to have a 3-foot wide piece of paper that's 70 feet long that we could run out on the floor and really kind of get into sort of what this really means as a corridor design. But I'll have to make the best of our laptops and see if they can pick up on the graphics.
Hopefully by the time we're getting to
Lauren?
the design level, we can meet in person, but we'll see. I'm sorry, Mike, you were going to say something?
I was just going to, I'm sorry to interrupt. Are we going to be releasing this information prior to the forum or for public consumption? Or are we just going to show this for the first time at the forum?
That's another good point. Thank you for bringing that up. I think that it would be beneficial for people to look at it in advance. That's my opinion. Is there a recommendation against that?
Nope.
Because I think that
agree.
was
Well, I
one
think-
of the things in our
Okay.
previous forums that people were, one of the residents in particular that I heard from a lot throughout this process was they just felt sort of blindsided. They hadn't had time to digest. And I think given that this is the recommendation, this is our last forum here, I would like people to be able to come prepared and know what questions that they might have.
Yeah, and that speaks to pushing the forum date back, so it gives them at least a week
Yeah,
or more for the public. So
I think
okay.
I
That's why I
agree.
asked that question. Yeah.
Thank you. So now with that in mind, does Thursday, October 21st, that work for Jim, Jeff, and our group?
So I have, I'm helping the town out with the tree pond project too.
Yeah.
And it's likely that, although it's not entirely clear at the moment, there's a decent chance that we'll be presenting that project to the Conservation Commission on the 21st. It's not clear yet. I'd need to double check on that. So the thing that I would suggest is if we do want to do it on the 21st, that we just make sure that the timings line up okay. I think both meetings will be virtual, so it's fine for me to hop from one to the other.
Okay, I have some friends in the conservation office that I can talk to about scheduling for you. So I mean, if the 21st works, I'd like to put that into the calendar and plan on that being our date. And with that said, I also want to have a date that we can release the material for in the calendar. That way I can, publicize that for the people as well.
I'm gonna say this, that Jim's topic at conservation is more important than the Elm Street Working Group.
So
Oh, you're
I mean,
making that call, Jason?
What? Says
So-
you.
the
Says
question
yes.
then,
Says 100%, yes, it is the most important thing that he needs to deal with. It's Treats Pond.
so I'll also ask then, I'll just throw it out, the 28th. Is that too far out?
It's okay with me.
One of the
Fine.
advantage might be you might hear back on your grant by then and be able to give good news.
That would be, yeah, that would be great if could happen. Yeah, so I mean, if Thursday the 28th works for this group, then we'll just skip the conflict. We'll plan for the 28th. And then we have certainly enough time to publicize and get material out to folks so that they can review this in advance.
What time that evening would we do it? I might have a conflict that evening too.
So
Got a lot of
when,
Thursday conflicts.
what time is your conflict?
6 to 7:30.
So could you do a 7:30 start time?
Sure,
If we say 7:30?
sure. If everybody else is fine with that, I'm fine with that.
I'm seeing a thumbs up from Chief Sylvia.
And
All right.
we're still quite a ways out too, you know, that even if you don't have to notice it for another week and a half, it might give Jim a little other time to see if that other meeting moves around too. So 7:30 worst case, best case is his conflict goes away or changes and maybe we can do a little earlier start time.
Okay, yeah, we don't need to notice it at this time. I think maybe next week, that we would give people 3 weeks, but I think we can coordinate in the meantime between then, and then I can make an announcement on the 7th saying, 3 weeks from today, we're gonna have the public forum. And then at that point, whether we want to release the information that day or the 14th, we can determine that, but at least I can have a concrete date to tell people the report will be available. You'll have 2 weeks or a week to review it, whatever the timeline winds up being.
And if the 21st freed up, because that the whole tree pond thing is reliant on our ability to get materials to do the contracting and various other things. If that moved off the 21st, I'm certainly fine with the 21st if that's preferable for this group.
Okay, so we'll know that we'll have, it's either going to be the 21st or the 28th.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. And I should know within a few days or a week.
Okay, so then what I'll suggest as next steps is we can hold, and I'll send some dates, some events out so that you have them in your calendar for everyone. And then Jim, if you and I can connect offline and sort of figure out the logistics and timing specifically, then I can update the group and we can go from there. That sound good for everyone? All
Sounds
right,
good.
well, everyone, thank you so much again for your time. We've had a lot of really productive get-togethers recently, so thank you all for being here. And we'll be in touch about next steps. And I think I just want to say I'm encouraged and excited that we're making progress here. So hopefully, the community is appreciative of this recommendation from the group, and we'll see where we go from here.
Sounds
And
good.
fingers crossed that we get a grant award in the next
Yes.
month.
Yes. Thanks, Lauren. Thanks, Jason.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Lauren.
Have a good night.
Everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.